when their idea of liberty is your idea of death. At the heart of the American ethos is the contested idea of freedom. In the video announcing his 2024 re-election bid, pointedly called Freedom, President Biden staked out his vision, declaring, "Around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on bedrock freedoms, cutting Social Security that you've paid for your entire life, while cutting taxes from the very wealthy, dictating what healthcare decisions women can make, banning books and telling people who they can love, all while making it more difficult for you to be able to vote. The question we're facing," Biden told viewers, "is whether in the years ahead, we will have more freedom or less freedom. More rights or fewer," adding, "Every generation of Americans will face the moment when they have to defend democracy. Stand up for our personal freedom. Stand up for the right to vote and our civil rights. And this is our moment." The 2024 election shows every sign of becoming a partisan battle to claim ownership of the ideal of freedom, with each side determined to persuade voters that the opposition's assertions are not just false but a threat to individual and group rights. This dispute is possible because freedom as an abstraction is fraught with multiple and often conflicting meanings. The debate over where to draw the lines between freedom, liberty, rights, democracy, responsibility, autonomy, obligation, justice, fairness and citizenship has been going on for centuries, but has steadily intensified with the success of the liberation movements of the past 7 decades, the civil rights, women's rights, gay rights and sexual rights revolutions. In sharp contrast to Biden, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, in The Courage to Be Free, his campaign book, published in February, warns that the threat to freedom is not limited to the actions of governments, but also includes a lot of aggressive, powerful institutions hellbent on imposing a woke agenda on our country. The enemies of freedom, DeSantis contends, are entrenched elites that have driven our nation into the ground, elites that control the federal bureaucracy, lobby shops on K Street, corporate media, big tech companies and universities. These privileged few, DeSantis argues, use undemocratic means to foist everything from environmental, social, and governance (ESG) policies on corporations, forcing as well critical race theory on public schools, in what the Florida governor calls an attempt to impose ruling class ideology on society. This debate fits into a larger context famously described by the political philosopher Isaiah Berlin in his 1958 Oxford University speech, Two Concepts of Liberty. "If I am prevented by others from doing what I could otherwise do, I am to that degree unfree, and if this area is contracted by other men beyond a certain minimum, I can be described as being coerced, or, it may be, enslaved." Positive freedom, Berlin continued, derives from the wish on the part of the individual to be his own master. "I wish my life and decisions to depend on myself, not on external forces of whatever kind. I wish to be the instrument of my own, not of other men's, acts of will. I wish to be a subject, not an object." Jefferson Cowie, a history professor at Vanderbilt, captured the intensity and depth of division over freedom during the civil rights movement in his book Freedom's Dominion, a saga of white resistance to federal power, which won the Pulitzer Prize for History this week. Cowie wrote that the governor of Alabama, George Wallace, in his Segregation Now, Segregation Tomorrow and Segregation Forever inaugural speech on January 14, 1963, invoked freedom 25 times, more than Martin Luther King Jr. used the term later that year in his I Have a Dream address at the March on Washington. "Let us rise to the call of freedom-loving blood that is in us," Wallace told his audience, "and send our answer to the tyranny that clanks its chains upon the South." For Wallace, in other words, the right to maintain segregation was a form of freedom. The dichotomy between the notions of freedom promulgated by George Wallace and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. continues to polarize the nation today. Rogers M. Smith, a political scientist at the University of Pennsylvania, wrote by email in response to my inquiry about the contest over freedom. Biden stands in the liberal tradition going back to FDR, which holds that to be truly free, people have to be able to meet their material needs, so that they have opportunities for their diverse pursuits of happiness, and they also need democratic institutions giving them a share in shaping their collective destinies. Ronald Reagan, according to Smith, thought freedom meant being largely free of government interference in people's lives, whether through regulation or assistance. He did believe in freedom as democratic self-governance. For Trump and DeSantis, Smith argued, freedom is more constrained and restrictive. For these two, freedom means having governmental policies that protect the ways of life they favor against those they don't. Their notion of freedom is the narrowest. In fact, it is primarily an argument for using coercive governmental power, and in Trump's case private violence, against all who they see as threats to their preferred ways of life. They support democracy as long as, but only as long as, it produces the results they want. Jack Citrin, a political scientist at Berkeley, pointed out in his email that different types of freedom can impinge on each other as well as create different winners and losers. Negative liberty is freedom from external constraints, particularly from the government. This is the dominant idea, I think, in the Bill of Rights. It is linked to individualism and libertarianism. So I am free to carry a gun on the right, free to have an abortion or change my sex on the left. Positive liberty means the freedom to act to provide collective good, so it is easy to see that there can be a tension between the two. As with many political concepts, Citrin continued, there is an elasticity in this term that allows competing parties to stake a claim for their version of freedom. Biden paints Trump as a threat to one's freedom to have an abortion or to vote. Trump claims the deep state is a threat to your privacy or legal rights. In addition, one group's freedom constrains another's. When their idea of liberty is your idea of death. At the heart of the American ethos is the contested idea of freedom. In the video announcing his 2024 re-election bid, pointedly called Freedom, President Biden staked out his vision, declaring, around the country, MAGA extremists are lining up to take on bedrock freedoms, cutting Social Security that you've paid for your entire life, while cutting taxes from the